Hello and welcome to the Fintech Australia podcast, presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. I'm Dexter Cousins, and in today's show, we're joined by Lizzie Chapman, CEO and co-founder at ZestMoney, live from India. But before we talk to Lizzie, a shout out to our awesome partners, Fintech Australia. They're a member-driven organisation building an ecosystem of Australian fintechs advancing the global economy. We share their mission to build a strong community, foster connections, and support innovation. If you're not a member yet, go to fintechaustralia.org.au. Welcome to the show, Lizzie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's awesome to have you here, and I've been wanting to do this for quite a long time because I think when you and I first were introduced to each other 2.5 years ago, believe it or not, I was really blown away by everything that you were doing with ZestMoney and how you were telling me about the Indian market. So it's an absolute delight to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Now, for the benefit of our listeners, some of whom actually are in India, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about ZestMoney and who you are as well?
Of course. Yeah. So I guess the simplest way to describe ZestMoney for your audience is we're a zip or an afterpay for the India market. But it's a shame to have to compare us to one of those companies because obviously the India market is very different. What we are doing is trying to solve a problem of access to credit as well, right? Not just the form factor. So I'll just give you a little statistic, which hopefully will help you understand why we packed up our bags and moved our lives here to do this. Today in India, there are about 500 million people shopping online. There are about 100 million people using Google Pay, for example, which is the biggest digital payments app. Okay. But at the same time, there are about 25 million people who have access to a credit card, right? So India is just the most fascinating market because it's one where people are adapting to digital technology faster than anywhere else in the world, but banks and traditional financial institutions just can't keep up. And so we have this huge underpenetration challenge for a bunch of products, from insurance to wealth management. But the problem we're trying to solve is one of consumer credit. And we felt that the best way to do that was to create products that partner with retailers, manufacturers, and the entire digital ecosystem. And we deliver credit at the point of sale, or what we call contextual credit. Now, of course, the buzzword is buy now, pay later. Now, we've been doing this for about 4.5 years in India, but we have a backstory. And me and my co-founder...
Well, you don't sound Indian, so...
I know. Well, you know, a lot of people think I'm Australian, so that's even more appropriate for this conversation. Yeah, I don't know why. And so basically, me and my co-founders met in London about 10 years ago. We were working for one of the biggest fintech companies in Europe at the time, a company called Wonga. And
I know it well.
Everyone knows
Newcastle United. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, that's one of the good reasons to know Wonga. But everyone in fintech probably knows of Wonga. But we met there, the three of us, and the three of us had a passion for India, obviously, and we felt that we could use the technology that was being developed by companies like Wonga to solve a much bigger and more important problem in countries like India. And that was a dream we had 10 years ago. And we're just really, pleased that we've managed to make it a reality. So we started about 5 years ago, and it's been an amazing journey. We couldn't have wished for more in the last 5 years.
Well, it's just incredible, right? That you've kind of taken such a huge gamble in a market where it's kind of unproven. So how did you pluck up the courage to do that?
That was a good question. I think sometimes having lesser knowledge about something can be a good thing, especially when you're going to do something really crazy, right? And I think we didn't let the no's get to us. So a lot of people that have obviously grown up and operated in a market like India have faced lots of challenges through their career, and they understand, how hard it is to get things done. In a way, when we turned up, with our sort of rose-tinted view of how, software and technology was going to change everything. We had a advantage. We had a vision, and we had a viewpoint that few other people in the market had. We had seen technology change financial services at scale, and we'd operated in a business in London that had served more than 4 million customers from a tiny little office with 40 people in North London. So we knew that technology worked. We knew that you could build these systems, and we had absolute confidence in our ability to do it. What that meant was when we met, people in the early days, lawyers and bankers in India who would say, no, this is never going to happen. This won't work here. We just didn't take no for an answer. And we pushed on, we plowed on, we insisted on building a completely end-to-end digital product, which at the time was genuinely, unheard of. And still to this day, we won't compromise on that. So we say no to a lot of business. We say no to a lot of opportunities because they would involve some kind of physical or manual element. And sometimes we get, criticized for that. And people say, well, you need to be phygital, or you need to have, a man in the middle. That's the new buzzword in AI, have a man in the middle. But we just won't compromise because we know what we're good at. And what we're good at is building completely automated products. And that's what we want to bring to this market. And that's because we think it's the only way to really solve this problem. People have tried for years to do it the manual way, and that hasn't scaled. And we believe that the technology that exists in our industry today is sufficient to take this product to literally tens of millions of people. But the only way to do that is with relentless focus on digital technology.
Now, what's the kind of size and scale of the Indian market, just to kind of give us some context as to the absolute hugeness of this opportunity that you're talking about?
Yeah, and it's so funny as well to sort of compare it to Australia, because Australia is fascinating actually, and we are obsessed and have a huge amount of respect for the Australian fintech landscape because it created these huge and amazing companies like Afterpay. In our space, it's even more incredible when you look at the data, right? So we think that today, amongst the 1.4 billion people that live in this country, let's just say that again, 1.4 billion people. We believe
we got 25.5 million people.
Exactly. Exactly, right? You see the opportunity already. But even
and yet, do you know Afterpay has a market cap now of close to $50 billion.
Oh my God. I can't keep up.
Right?
I can't keep up.
It is insane, right?
Well, there you go, right? And I think, that's actually kind of the point, right? So what we're saying is we don't even need to have 25% of the population using our product. I think BNPL is used by something like 25% of Australian shoppers. We don't even need to make that type of ambition. We're saying that, look, there's 550 million people shopping online today, 550. They are, using digital services confidently. They're booking things. They're using Tinder. Tinder's, by the way, a huge business in India. They're doing all sorts of things digitally and online and on their mobile phones. And even if just a tiny percentage of those people switch to a BNPL product as their preferred payment mechanism, you can build a huge business. So we've touched about 8 million customers today in this market, which is really just, the tip of the iceberg. We believe that there are about 200 million.
Our listeners and Aussie founders are just about to burst into tears now.
I know, right? You just have to rip up the rule book, different numbers, add a few zeros when you're looking in. And we think that 200 million households today are ready, ripe, and keen to use these products. And it's interesting. Another interesting point about India, we talk on a household basis because very often there will be one income earner supporting a lot of people, a lot of consumption. So we don't sort of get carried away with the 1.4 billion. We look, very clearly at what is the use case, what is the opportunity. But maybe let me just give you some other quite interesting data points. What do you think smartphone penetration is in India? So we said there's like 500 million people shopping online. Smartphone penetration
today. 50% of people have got smartphones?
It's actually still less than that. It's less than 40%. So,
Right.
what that means is there's going to be about 600 to 700 million people in the next few years who will buy their first smartphone. Now, who's
Wow.
going to
So that
finance
they're
all of
actually
that?
behind Southeast Asia then, because
Yeah,
I think that's nearly at 60% now.
right, exactly. And why is that? What's one of the biggest challenges in buying a smartphone? It's the affordability aspect, right? So, I think the point is everybody in this market, especially young people, are really no different to many other Southeast Asian and even Western markets. They want to own the kind of products we all do. They want the experiences. They want to go on a weekend trip to Goa. They want to go to a concert. They want the same kind of consumption behaviors. But affordability is a huge challenge here. Incomes are obviously significantly lower than in
Mm.
Australia. And, go back to that first point, only 30 million people have access to a credit card. So clearly, credit card is not going to be the way that we drive penetration of a lot of these products in the market. So you could argue, that India might become one of the largest buy now, pay later markets in the world. And one more point on this, because I think everybody's got used to this concept now in countries like Australia that
Mm.
young digital consumers are ripping up their credit cards and switching to these products for a variety of reasons. And obviously in India, people have never had credit cards to rip up.
Mm.
But there's an even more interesting behavioral pattern here, which is that Indian consumers are extremely savvy. They are not keen to waste money on anything. They're very, very good at looking after their own, financial health. And therefore, the credit card model itself will not take off here, we believe.
Yeah.
That whole concept of sort of forgetting, how much you had outstanding and rolling it to the next month is actually very unpleasant to a lot of people in this market, a lot of people around the world, but definitely in this market where people are used to much more transparency in the products they consume. And so, again, we think for these reasons, BNPL has a lot more
Mm.
relevance in a market like this compared to even, say, Australia. Yeah.
I guess the other thing that you're going to have as well, we got a lot of regulatory pressure at the minute, and dare I say it,
Yes.
interference and lobbying and all of that stuff going on. And if you read the media, it's all about BNPL and how it's bad and how people are getting into debt. Very
Yeah.
few stories of people like myself who have wiped out credit card debt, or I'm a personal trainer who's wiped out credit card debt and now doesn't even need to use BNPL because of the
Wonderful.
money that they've saved on interest payments.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think it sounds to me that what you're kind of sharing with us, Lizzie, is that if Australia is not careful, from an innovation perspective, India is going to be fast forwarding us very, very quickly.
Yeah, we think so too. We think so
Yeah.
too.
There's a warning for you if Senator Bragg or Scott Morrison is listening to this, or a great minister for fintech. If you're all listening to this, let's not fall behind, please. So you do have a connection into Australia as well. So Reinventure have invested in you, and I've always been very, very kind of, I guess, or I've always admired Reinventure's investment hypotheses. It's been, I think, very brave in terms of being very forward-looking as well.
Yes.
It was great to see that, the Coinbase investment they made early on looks like that's going to pay off.
Yeah.
What was your view of kind of working with Reinventure, and what's your view of Australia overall?
Yeah, we were actually very excited when Reinventure reached out. We had been obviously following the Afterpay and Zip stories and the entire kind of BNPL space in Australia. And so it was really exciting when Reinventure got in touch and said, we can give you more insights into these businesses. We can introduce you to the founders of Zip, which they did immediately. And we just learned a lot from those conversations. So I think we've had a great rapport with Reinventure. We love the fact that they were brave enough to take a relatively early stake in us in a market like India. But they do have a lot of understanding of the India market, a surprising amount, actually. Simon himself has spent a lot of time on the ground in India. personally and professionally. And he has a real sort of passion and conviction in the opportunity in the market, which is really the best thing you look for in an investor. So it's been an amazing experience, and we've learned not just about the BNPL story in Australia, but they've even introduced us to a lot of big data companies, collections technology companies. And I do think that a lot of the innovations that we're seeing, especially in infrastructure and collections technology, are even more critically needed in our market. And so
Yeah.
in a way, it's helped us kind of fast forward what the landscape might look like in a couple of years, and definitely given us, ideas ourselves for how we can
Mm.
push things a bit faster. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the great tragedies that I see of this kind of whole BNPL debate that we're having here in Australia is that when you look under the hood of Afterpay's credit risk model
Yeah.
and the whole approach that they've got, I mean, it's groundbreaking, right? It's the way forward. And
Yeah.
yet, here we are, with all these other businesses that go and look at, 20 years worth of back activity rather than what's actually going to impact this person's ability to repay a debt,
Yeah.
and a fairly small debt as well. And
Yeah.
I just think back to my childhood, Lizzie, with oldest kid of 5, single mom. Like, she wouldn't have got credit from anyone, and yet she was
Yeah.
one of the most creditworthy people you could ever want to meet in your life.
Yeah.
So I really think there's a power in the innovation that's happening, not just the technology, but I think the complete shift in the approach to credit risk as well.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And we've learned that here even more. I love your story about your mother. It's similar in India in the context that often the people that the traditional guys think are the highest risk, right? So, lower income, maybe self employed,
Mm,
guys running small little grocery shops in, a small town or a small village. These are the typical customers that are completely ignored by the traditional banks. And we proved, especially over the last 12 months, which was the ultimate challenge for anybody in a lending or credit risk business, we proved that these are the customers that are the most committed. They repaid the fastest. They saw so much value in what we offer them that they
mm.
were actually the quickest to, get back onto a good repayment schedule because they wanted to keep using the product. And so we actually had counterintuitively the best repayment rates from what the banks would, traditionally consider the riskier segments.
Cool. Well, we're going to take a quick break, Lizzie. But when we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit more about the Zest business and the culture and some of the differences that you've noticed. Tier 1 People helps world-class fintech launch, scale, and innovate. As the fintech industry in Australia begins to mature, many of our early startup clients are now becoming enterprises. And as fintech goes mainstream, many enterprises are reinventing themselves as fintechs. Tier 1 People proudly works with companies at the forefront of fintech innovation. Our clients include international fintech, corporate ventures, big tech, tech platforms, banks, payment providers, and financial institutions. We're about to kick off a number of searches for program and project management professionals to deliver significant acquisition, integration, and change programs. We're interested in talking to talent with expertise in merging fintech startups with banks, technology integration specialists in lending and banking, and those with expertise in transforming legacy financial services businesses into fintech. If you'd like to be on our radar for these upcoming opportunities, email your details to info@tier1people.com. Welcome back to the show, Lizzie.
Thank you.
Now, I can't help but point this out that, and I'm sure everybody else can see this as well, you're a female who's in fintech and has gone to India. And I would have thought that as a founder, that would have been almost like something that you could never, ever get off the ground. So many challenges, I would assume, that were kind of against you. What's been your experience of actually going and launching a business in India?
um, so this is a funny one, and I have to be a little bit careful sometimes when I speak about this topic because I don't want to sound insensitive to a lot of women who I'm sure have faced, oppression and challenge. But I honestly feel that we've been very fortunate, and maybe we're the exception that proves the rule. But it's really a true statement to say that our gender has had zero impact, I believe, on, the success that we've had. And even things like fundraising, right? When you look at the data, I'm always reading these reports about how hard it is for women to raise funding and how few women founded businesses get funding and blah, blah, blah. And remember, we're a 2 female co-founder business. We've got 2 women and a guy. And yet, I think in our space, we've probably raised, the most number of funding rounds so far. We've done a pretty good job, and we've raised money from, very kind of, I guess, traditional fintech investors like Goldman Sachs. We haven't, NASPers, we haven't faced the obvious challenges. Now, sometimes I wonder, what's that about? Why is that? Is there something, unusual about us? And I don't think there is. I think it comes down to something that might sound a little bit wishy-washy or maybe spiritual, but I have a theory that you kind of get the energy that you put out into the world, right? And so if you face the topic of fundraising as a woman with a viewpoint that it's going to be hard, women don't get funded, this is tough, you are going to struggle, right? Because actually, we don't know that, right? Perception is reality. And if you believe,
that's gender agnostic, right? I mean,
exactly,
everybody faces that challenge.
Exactly. I mean, fundraising is just hard for everyone, right? It's a tough business. You have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince. But if you go into that process believing you're never going to find your prince, I think it's quite possible you won't. And so we've never had that mindset. One of the things that's great about my co-founder Priya and myself, I think maybe due to our upbringing, we've always worked in traditionally male-dominated environments. We've always risen up the ranks very quickly. We've done very well in our careers. And so we have a huge amount of confidence in our ability and our business. Execution speaks, million words. We've seen success. We know what we're doing, and we're very proud of what we've built. And so I think we approach even things like fundraising with a huge amount of confidence and belief in what we're doing. And therefore we get a good result. So I know it sounds simplistic, but I do think that kind of obsessing about this point is not necessarily beneficial to a lot of women founders. I think what's more important is that as women founders, we create good, strong role models and therefore create an ecosystem that is favorable. And I think the more women you see at the top, and you saw, the Bumble IPO just this week, not in fintech, but still very inspiring, the easier it becomes for women to both get out of that kind of negative mindset, but also to blaze a trail that investors and the ecosystem see as the norm. And, why not? Now, specific to India, I would say a couple of things, a bit controversial, but actually, when it comes to women in corporate life, especially financial services, India looks remarkably successful. When I first came here about 10 years ago, the largest banks in the country, or majority of them, were run by women. The MNC banks, even banks like HSBC, Citibank, were run by women at that time. And so it's actually not fair to say that this is
well, that's
ecosystem.
One of my biases completely smashed now.
Right? Exactly. And, I sometimes tell this story, but I started my career as an equity research analyst at Goldman, covering global banks. And I'd sometimes have to go and interview like a CEO of a global bank. I won't name them, but often I would walk into the meeting and I would be taken for being an assistant or, bag carrier. And that has never happened in India to me. And I do think that it's easy to, again, look for the negatives and beat up on the industry. But actually, India statistically is not doing a bad job. And there's some incredible fintech female founders running some amazing business today. In fact, some of the most innovative and exciting businesses that you see coming up in the India fintech market have women at the helm. And I think it's really important that we celebrate that, recognize that, rather than focusing on the challenges.
I completely agree. Now, with respect to the business that you're building, what kind of culture are you and your co-founders kind of developing at ZestMoney?
Oh, lovely. We are, I hope, developing a culture that rewards passionate, innovative hard work. We are a very, very fair organization. It sounds like a bit of a strange description, but in a world of, well, you use the word actually, I guess, boys' clubs, but maybe even hierarchical systems,
Yeah.
we have always tried to create an environment that is extremely fair,
Mm.
extremely transparent, and has a huge amount of authenticity. And I remember once when Ribbit Capital, our investors, came for a visit to India, and they met a bunch of different companies. And then they came to our office and they said, "Where's your gold plaques on your office? Why don't you have plaques with your names on your office doors like
Mm.
everybody else in India?" And we said, we don't even have offices. We just sit on the floor with our teammates, right? To this point, by the way, now I don't even have a desk anymore. That got taken away during COVID. So we really try and create a level playing field. We're probably one of the more approachable founders, I think, in the India ecosystem. At least that's what our team
Yeah.
say. It's a genuine, open door, collaborative kind of environment. And we are people that get our hands dirty, right? So we still, as founders, do a lot of hands on work. And so you could say we sort of lead by example, and we want people that have that same approach. So it's a really nice, really passionate group of people. And it's also one that really celebrates diversity, right? Because
Yeah.
if you look at our backgrounds and our life experiences, and I don't just mean the obvious stuff like gender, I'm also talking about things like, social diversity,
Mm.
income diversity. We've got people from literally all over the country from very different educational backgrounds. And one thing we're so proud of is how well everybody works together and what kind of an
Yeah.
inclusive and diverse culture we've created.
I think there's something that you touched on there that really resonates with me, and I do get annoyed with the kind of reference boys club
Mm,
because one, boys don't act that way, neither do men.
yeah.
And I think what we're talking about is elitism. You touched on this with a
Yes.
gold plaque, right? And elitism and abuse of privilege and power is really where the problem stems, not the gender or the boys club, or because most
Exactly.
99% of guys aren't in the boys club either, right?
Exactly.
So I think
Exactly.
it's kind of what we need to do is call it by what it is, right? And
Correct.
it's abuse of power and elitism.
Correct.
Now, other than ZestMoney, which are some of the other Indian fintechs? You touched on this before. Could you name some of them that you think we should be keeping an eye out on?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Uh, and there's a lot. There's a lot of action in India at the moment. We've got some mega, mega giants, right? We've got all the big kind of Google Pays and
Yeah.
Phone Pays of the world. But I guess what I get excited about are people solving the more niche problems that look like small problems, but could build huge businesses in a country like India. First bucket, I would say, are the infrastructure players, right? So one of the interesting things about the India market, and you alluded to it earlier, is that we have a regulator that's quite black and white here,
Mm.
right? So what they don't allow for are too many gray areas. They, for example, in the lending space, believe that every loan should sit on a bank or an NBFC, which is a kind of semi-bank. And so what that creates is a really interesting dynamic where fintech companies and tech companies have to work with banks, right, all the time. And being able to work with a bank is non-trivial, right? There's a huge amount of technology and cultural pain that goes into a tech company and a bank working together. And there's a few companies in this market trying to solve that problem. So they're building that kind of middleware, that infrastructure layer that will allow tech companies and banks to build products together really, really fast. Probably the most interesting, there's one called Setu, Setu, and there's one called YAP or M2P. And these are relatively small today, but I think if you just fast forward and look at what will financial services look like in 10 years, these are going to be huge companies, potentially bigger
Mm.
than Visa or MasterCard, in my opinion. And then
Wow.
I think the second bucket I like are the very brave entrepreneurs in this country who are trying to solve a problem for very, very niche segments that get really ignored, right? And
your niche is like total market country
it's doing like
opportunity.
50 million people in a niche, exactly. And it's true. I mean, there's some, I like, this is embarrassing to say this, but there's somebody solving a problem for working women, right? Believe it or not, that is a niche in India. We still have less than 20% participation in the workforce. So women who've got their first salary job are really ignored by the traditional banks, because it's assumed that eventually they'll get married and their husband will look after their finances. So there's a few companies that are trying to solve that problem. There's one called Basis, BASIS, run by women, of course, and there's a new one that's just launched called SALT, SALT, and they're both focusing on this segment of young working women who are emerging, in their droves in India. And like I say, it's a niche that shouldn't be a niche and soon will be a huge market, and building products that really work for them to help them manage their financial life and plan for their future. And I think those are really, really exciting opportunities. And they're actually potentially opportunities that will become, global opportunities, but can be built and tested in a market like India with such a big, potential footprint.
Wow. I just feel so, the business is 5 years old this year, and we're doing well. But gosh, when I look at these and hear the size of the opportunity in a market like India, you just think, wow, this is just, we haven't even begun to get started in fintech yet.
Exactly. We have a phrase we say inside Zest that all our team are now obsessed with saying, which is, it's really day zero. Right? Every day it feels like day zero. We have just started. The opportunity is so huge, and I think if we fast forward to what the world's going to look like in a decade, we will all be kicking ourselves if we're not part of this amazing evolution that is about to happen in financial services.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to wrap up soon, but before we do, what does the future hold for ZestMoney?
Yes. So we are doing
book plug time.
Yeah, I mean, well, 1 billion people first. No, so we are still completely obsessed with solving this same problem. And as we say, we think it really is day zero. India market offers such a huge amount of potential for people building businesses like ours. And the good news is, so far, none of the big global guys have come or are looking at it. So we have a really good kind of window of opportunity before any of them wake up to the potential for this market. But what we've observed is there's a few other markets like that in the region. And especially in Southeast Asia, if you leave aside Indonesia, which does attract a lot of capital and attention, there are lots of markets where, the VC industry has ignored them by and large. And even big global financial institutions have not really penetrated to a great degree. But you have this young, emerging, very digital consumer who actually looks and behaves a lot like the type of customer we serve in India. And so we see a huge opportunity to develop our product for these markets. And I'm talking about markets like the Philippines, like Vietnam, and even Thailand to some extent. And what we're really good at is partnerships. That's what kind of defines ZestMoney. We're really good at partnering with brands and retailers, and we're really good at partnering with banks and using their balance sheet. And so what we're doing right now is having deep discussions with a bunch of both bank partners and also retail partners in these markets. And we're discovering that there is actually very little local equivalent of what we do. And one reason is that India really is the tech hub of Asia in terms of talent. And so one of the biggest kind of secret sauce or, powerful pieces of infrastructure we have is our amazing team. And why should we not leverage that incredible team that we've built? They're one of the best, most expert AI, data science engineering teams in the world. Can't we use that expertise to solve a similar problem in some of these markets like the Philippines and Vietnam? So hopefully by the end of this year, you will see us announce a big partnership. But we are still very much in sort of data gathering mode, and we're really learning about these markets, these economies, and this consumer.
Well, Lizzie, it has been awesome to have you on the show. I'm just fascinated by everything that you've shared. I'm kind of my mind's a bit blown, actually. Where can people find out more about ZestMoney?
Yes. So obviously you can find us on the web. Just Google ZestMoney. You'll see all sorts of interesting PR and our website. But also follow me on Twitter. I have lots of things to say. So follow me on Twitter at Chapman Lizzie. And hopefully as well, I'll share more and more information about the India fintech market, and would love to have, deeper conversations with people in the Australia fintech market and see if we can learn from each other.
Well, absolutely. Look, we're definitely going to get you back on the show at some point. It's just fascinating to hear everything that you're talking about, and we wish you and the ZestMoney team, all the best.
Thank you so much. It's been really fun, and please have me back when we're worth 30 billion, which hopefully is soon.
Well, by the sounds of it, it's not going to be that far off. And you can find me, folks, at Dexter Cousins on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. And if you like today's show, please subscribe to the podcast and don't forget to leave us a review. It really does help me bring on great guests like Lizzie. This show is produced by Tier 1 people, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you launch, scale, and innovate by delivering world-class talent. And you can find us info@tier1people.com. Until the next episode, stay safe